What's up, guys? This is Matt Singer from ScreenCrush.com, and today we're counting down the top 5 DC movies that were never made. In 2017, the DC Extended Universe is in full swing, with films like Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, Suicide Squad, and now Wonder Woman featuring Gal Gadot as the Goddess of Truth. Before there was a DCEU, though, there was just DC Comics. And for decades, Warner Brothers has been mining their source material for their movies. We've seen some successful DC adaptations over the years, like Richard Donner's Superman and Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, but a ton of planned DC movies never made it to the big screen. We've already done the top 5 Batman movies that were never made, so today we're counting down the 5 biggest non-Batman DC movie projects that got trapped in the Phantom Zone, starting with number 5, Green Lantern starring Jack Black? The early 2000s were one of the blackest nights in the history of DC cinema. DC's movie mojo was pretty much killed dead by 1997's one-two punch of Batman and Robin and Steel. Batman Begins wouldn't arrive until 2005, and in the interim, Warner Brothers experimented with some unusual ideas for comic book movies, including a comedic version of the intergalactic super cop, Green Lantern. They hired Robert Smigel, better known as the guy behind Triumph the Insult Comic Dog, to write a script in the hopes that Jack Black would star. Supposedly, Black wasn't interested, but then read Smigel's script, which he later described to Yahoo as a work of, quote, genius. Smigel's version seized on the idea that the Green Lantern power ring chooses the person who wears it. His screenplay featured a malfunctioning ring that rejects Hal Jordan and chooses Jack Black instead, who would play the star of a reality television series. Smigel told Vanity Fair he based his idea on the miniseries Emerald Dawn and had Sinestro as his villain, along with some political commentary about the Patriot Act and terrorism. He envisioned a bumbling hero who could create wacky constructions with his power ring, and even wore a fanny pack, because where else would he put his wallet in that thing? Black loved all of this, but Warner Brothers didn't. Some fans were outraged too, and even Smigel admitted that if he was a hardcore Green Lantern fan, he would have seen his script as, quote, a personal affront. Black told Yahoo the studio, quote, didn't want to pull the trigger, and eventually the whole thing fell apart. But it all worked out in the end, when in 2011 DC made a much more serious adaptation of Green Lantern, starring Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan and Peter Sarsgaard as a dude with a giant testicle growing out of his forehead. Next up, number 4, The Wachowskis' Plastic Man. The Wachowskis are amongst the most comic book-esque filmmakers on the planet. They even wrote some comics before they hit it big with The Matrix, but they've never actually adapted a comic book to the screen. The closest they came was in the mid-90s when they wrote an unproduced screenplay for Plastic Man, based on the rubbery, shape-changing DC hero. According to IGN, their interpretation focused on an environmentalist named Dan O'Brien, who breaks into a laboratory performing unnatural experiments and winds up becoming their latest test subject. The company's new polymerization process turns him into Plastic Man, who needs to learn how to control his powers, stop the bad guys, and save his hometown of Calumet City. The Wachowskis told MTV's Josh Horowitz that Plastic Man was probably the closest script to a comedy they ever wrote, and singled out a gag they thought was really funny where Plastic Man, quote, goes to the bathroom after he becomes Plastic Man, and his urine is no longer biodegradable, so he wants to kill himself. Interesting. Warner Brothers didn't have the Wachowskis in mind to direct. They were still untested filmmakers at the time. Instead, they wanted Brian Spicer, the director of McHale's Navy and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie. Brian Spicer over the Wachowskis. Yeah, that's a stretch. Thank you. I'm here all week. Be sure to tip your waitstaff. Anyway, Plastic Man never happened. Let's move on. Next up, number 3, Escape from Supermax. Years before Green Arrow became the anchor of an entire wave of DC superhero shows on the CW, he was very nearly one of the first DC heroes other than Batman and Superman to get his own solo superhero movie. In the mid-2000s, Blade and Batman Begins screenwriter David Goyer and future Jungle Book writer Justin Marks worked on a script that was initially called Supermax, about a notorious prison for super criminals. Goyer and Mark's script would have seen Green Arrow Oliver Queen framed for murder and sent to Supermax, where, according to an interview with Marks at MTV.com, he would have had to team with villains like Lex Luthor and the Riddler to escape and prove his innocence. Goyer and Marks also envisioned appearances by the Tattoo Man and Suicide Squad's Amanda Waller, along with an Easter egg reference to the Joker. It's an intriguing idea, and clever in the way that it stuck a hero with no superpowers in this place where everyone has them, and many of them hold grudges against him. Despite all of that, Warner Brothers decided to shelve the concept, and years later, David Goyer told Den of Geek that the executives at Warner Brothers, quote, thought at the time, we just want to make Batman and Superman movies. We don't want to make any other characters. I mean, that makes sense. Who would want to see a comic book movie featuring an obscure character? Oh. Next up, number 2, Superman Lives. Look, if you want Superman movies, you can find them. 4 with Christopher Reeve, 1 with Brandon Routh, 2 and counting with Henry Cavill, a couple of serials, Max Fleischer cartoons, and on and on. Still, even with all the Men of Steel we've seen, there's one we still wish had made it to theaters, even if only in a morbidly curious kind of way. And that's Superman Lives, which would have been Batman director Tim Burton's version of the Superman mythos. The film's pedigree was anything but typical. Screenwriter Kevin Smith, Batman producer John Peters, Burton, of course, and his pick for Superman, Nicolas freaking Cage. Can you imagine this guy playing Superman? Me neither. But I couldn't imagine Michael Keaton as Batman either, and that worked out just fine. Admittedly, the movie could have been a disaster. Kevin Smith talked about how John Peters had absurd demands for the script. He didn't want Superman to fly or wear his famous costume, and then he demanded the script include polar bears and a fight with a giant spider. Okay. Then Burton came on board and recruited Cage, who wanted to totally turn Clark Kent upside down. It seems like upside down is generally what they were going for with Superman Lives. Jimmy Olsen? How about comedian Chris Rock? Superman villain Brainiac? How about certified weirdo Christopher Walken? A light-up iridescent suit? Behold! The story would have been based on the death and return of Superman storyline from the comics, and various drafts featured Doomsday, Brainiac, and Lex Luthor all trying to take down the Cage of Steel. There was even one concept where Brainiac and Lex Luthor would merge into Lexiac. But Burton's ideas were deemed too risky and too expensive, and he and Warner Brothers eventually parted ways. The project continued to mutate and evolve until Bryan Singer signed on to make Superman Returns. Superman Lives now lives on in the 2015 documentary The Death of Superman Lives: What Happened, where you could see a lot of these ideas in their unfinished form. Now it's time for the number 1 DC movie that was never made, George Miller's Justice League. While a Justice League movie is headed to theaters in just a few months from Man of Steel and Batman v Superman director Zack Snyder, with an assist from Joss Whedon, a few years before Snyder and Whedon took over the DC movieverse, and well before Marvel became synonymous with superhero team movies thanks to Whedon's The Avengers, we almost got a totally different Justice League film from Mad Max Fury Road director George Miller. The project was called Justice League Mortal, with a screenplay by Michelle and Kiernan Mulroney. According to Den of Geek, the film was designed as an action-heavy adventure for the Super Friends with very little in the way of origin story. A lineup of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, not Jack Black, The Flash, Martian Manhunter, and Aquaman would have fought a bunch of robots that were originally designed by Bruce Wayne as a contingency plan in case he ever had to take down his colleagues in the Justice League. The story had some similarities to a JLA comic book storyline called Tower of Babel, and another called the OMAC Project, where Batman spies on his fellow JLA members with an advanced satellite that then goes out of control. The cast of the film would have included Armie Hammer as Batman, Common as Green Lantern, and Adam Brody as The Flash, but the whole thing collapsed because of the 2008 writer's strike and a disagreement over a tax rebate for the film's massive budget, rumored to be in the neighborhood of $300 million. According to some accounts, the film was called off just days before shooting was supposed to begin. In the years since, a few images of concept art and costumes have popped up on the internet, and we've got Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon's Justice League to look forward to, but come on. A JLA movie from the director of Fury Road? That could have been an immortal superhero movie. For Screen Crush, I'm Matt Singer. Thanks for watching, and for even more, make sure to subscribe, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and get the latest movie and TV news on ScreenCrush.com.